Nós, estudantes do curso de Relações Internacionais da PUC São Paulo e integrantes do grupo de estudo sobre conflitos internacionais, em parceria com o Democracy Now!, apresentaremos as principais notícias da semana.
A partir de agora, com legendas em português, vincularemos os principais destaques internacionais.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Simply put, does the president believe he is above the law?
Certainly no one is above the law.
As President Trump claims absolute power, the power to pardon himself and to dismiss the Mueller investigation, is the nation on a path to a constitutional crisis? We'll speak to Philadelphia Daily News columnist Will Bunch about Trump's attempts to go what Bunch calls full dictator, and about Trump's decision to disinvite the Super Bowl champions Philadelphia Eagles from the White House today. Then we go to the U.S.-Mexico border to look at how the U.S. government's breaking up families and sending children to detention centers, often hundreds of miles from their parents. This is how one judge in Brownsville, Texas, describes the situation.
What you've done, in effect, by separating these children, is you're putting them someplace without their parents. You can imagine there's a hell, and that's probably what it looks like.
And the Supreme Court rules in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, citing his religious opposition. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Amnesty International says the U.S. airstrikes launched last year during the 2017 offensive to oust ISIS militants from the Syrian city of Raqqa were in violation of international law and potentially constitute war crimes. In Amnesty's new report, War of Annihilation, the group writes, "On the ground in Raqqa, we witnessed a level of destruction comparable to anything we've seen in decades of covering the impact of wars." The report is based on interviews with more than 100 civilian survivors, including members of the Badran family, which lost 39 family members and 10 neighbors in 4 separate U.S.-led coalition airstrikes. This is Donatella Rivera from Amnesty International.
We're talking about airstrikes, which should be fairly precise. So if buildings after buildings were destroyed with entire families inside, something must have gone wrong, and that something must be investigated because the people of Raqqa deserve justice and they deserve to know what went wrong. But until now, coalition officials have refused to engage in any meaningful way.
The Wall Street Journal reports the Trump administration is considering providing direct U.S. military support toward the Saudi-led offensive to seize control of Yemen's port city of Hodeidah, in what aid groups are warning could worsen the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Yemen. The Journal reports the United Arab Emirates, which is part of the Saudi-led coalition fighting Houthi rebels in Yemen, has appealed to the Trump administration to provide the direct support, which would further expand the U.S. role in the ongoing war that's killed 15,000 civilians, sparked the world's worst cholera epidemic, and pushed Yemen to the brink of famine. 80% of the humanitarian aid that's able to reach Yemen comes to the port city of Hodeidah, meaning if the Saudi coalition seizes the city, it could dramatically reduce food, water, and medicine in the besieged country. In Gaza, Israeli forces have shot and killed the cousin of the 21-year-old Palestinian medic Hassan al-Najjar, who was shot and killed by an Israeli sniper Friday. Israeli soldiers shot and killed Ramzi al-Najjar near the separation fence with Israel Monday. The Israeli military is claiming he was armed with an axe. The Israeli military has killed at least 120 Palestinians and wounded over 13,000 more amidst the Palestinians' nonviolent Great March of Return protests in Gaza that started March 30th. President Trump is continuing to attack Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. On Monday, Trump tweeted, "The appointment of the Special Counsel is totally unconstitutional." Trump also tweeted, "As has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself." unquote. In fact, as the New York Times reports, there's only one official opinion on whether a president can pardon himself. In August 1974, the acting head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel wrote in a memorandum that it would seem then President Richard Nixon could not pardon himself. A few days later, Nixon resigned. This comes as federal prosecutors for Special Counsel Robert Mueller have accused President Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, of attempting to tamper with the witnesses in the federal tax and money laundering case against him. Prosecutors say Manafort repeatedly tried to contact witnesses by phone and through encrypted messaging. Manafort is accused of breaking federal lobbying, tax, and money laundering laws. The Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, citing his religious opposition. In a narrow 7-2 decision, the justices faulted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission's handling of the claims brought against baker Jack Phillips, saying the commission had showed a hostility to religion. Though the case pitted claims of religious freedom against the fight for gay rights, the ruling stopped short of setting a major precedent on whether businesses can deny people services because of their sexual orientation. We'll have more on the Supreme Court ruling later in the broadcast. In Afghanistan, at least 14 people were killed when a suicide bomber attacked a gathering of religious leaders in the capital, Kabul, Monday. During the meeting, the clerics and religious scholars had declared suicide bombing a sin and the ongoing war in Afghanistan illegal under Islamic law. Shortly after making these proclamations, the bomber attacked the assembly. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attack. In Jordan, anti-austerity protests continued into a fifth day despite Monday's resignation of Prime Minister Hani Mulki, who had pushed for the income tax increases backed by the International Monetary Fund. Education Minister Omar Azaz has reportedly been tapped to serve as the next prime minister. He has formerly worked for the World Bank. The ongoing protests are the biggest in Jordan in years. In Guatemala, the death toll from the eruption of the Fuego volcano has risen to 69 people. The volcanic eruption 25 miles southwest of the capital, Guatemala City, has buried whole villages in lava. The death toll is expected to rise as search and rescue efforts continue. Back in the United States, voters head to the polls today for primaries in Alabama, California, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota. Among the races in Montana, Democrats will decide who faces off against Republican Congressmember Greg Gianforte, who physically attacked a Guardian reporter in 2017. In California, Democratic State Senator Kevin De Leon is vying to unseat Democratic U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein. Dozens of people were arrested in civil disobedience protests in cities across the United States Monday during a national day of action for the new Poor People's Campaign. Thousands of low-wage workers, clergy, and community activists participated in sit-ins, marches, and rallies calling on lawmakers to guarantee health care and a healthy environment for all. In Washington, D.C., 28 people were arrested in the Capitol Rotunda Monday while protesting the disproportionate impact of disasters such as Hurricane Maria on the poor. In Topeka, Kansas, 16 people were arrested as they demanded Medicaid expansion at the state capitol building. And in Kentucky, 400 activists were denied entry to the state capitol Monday while protesting the nation's first work requirements for Medicaid. Monday's actions are the fourth week of nonviolent direct action from the new Poor People's Campaign. On Monday, President Trump abruptly disinvited the Super Bowl-winning Philadelphia Eagles from visiting the White House today, tweeting, "Staying in the locker room for the playing of our national anthem is as disrespectful to our country as kneeling. Sorry," unquote. During last year's NFL season, no Eagles player took a knee. NFL owners recently ruled teams would be fined if players take the knee during the national anthem. They're protesting racism and police brutality, though the owners said they can stay in the locker room. Former President Bill Clinton is facing criticism after he told NBC's Craig Melvin that he did not owe an apology to former White House intern Monica Lewinsky.
Well, I asked if you'd ever apologized, and you said you had.
I have.
You've apologized to her.
I apologize to everybody in the world.
It is important to me that everybody who has been hurt know that the sorrow I feel is genuine. First and most important, my family, Monica Lewinsky and her family.
But you didn't apologize to her.
I have not talked to her.
Do you feel like you owe her an apology?
No, I do. I do not. I've never talked to her, but I did say publicly on more than one occasion that I was sorry. That's very different. The apology was public.
After widespread outrage about these comments, Clinton said he had apologized publicly to Monica Lewinsky. He was speaking last night at the Schomburg Center in New York. In the late 90s, President Clinton had a sexual affair with Lewinsky, who was at the time a 21-year-old unpaid intern at the White House. In a Vanity Fair essay published earlier this year, Lewinsky wrote, quote, "I now see how problematic it was that the two of us even got to a place where there was a question of consent. Instead, the road that led there was littered with inappropriate abuse of authority, station, and privilege," she wrote. And in Parkland, Florida, 4 high school seniors who were killed in the Valentine's Day massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, which killed 17 people in total, were honored at the high school's graduation Sunday night. Among them, Joaquin Oliver, whose mother accepted her son's diploma and cap and tassel while wearing a bright yellow T-shirt reading, "This should be my son." On Monday, students who survived the shooting massacre announced plans for a nationwide 2-month bus tour this summer aimed at registering young people to vote and to support gun control legislation. This is student Cameron Caskey.
Out there do not want a lot of young people voting. There are a lot of politicians who want marginalized communities staying out of the polls because they know they will be voted out. I think that a lot of people have slowly been less excited in voting because people are getting tired of the political system. But the thing is, we can fix the political system.
To see our full coverage of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre and the student-led March for Our Lives, go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I'm just so thankful. I feel like my life is starting over again. This is a miracle day. This has been the greatest day of my life. The most unexpected things happened to me in my life.
Alice Marie Johnson is a free woman after President Trump commuted her life sentence for a nonviolent drug conviction, thanks in part to a White House visit by Kim Kardashian West. The 63-year-old great-grandmother had already served 21 years behind bars, but this still leaves thousands of other prisoners serving life without parole for nonviolent drug offenses. We'll speak with the ACLU. Then to Nicaragua.
I join my brother bishops of Nicaragua in expressing sorrow for the serious violence carried out by armed groups to suppress social protests which have caused dead and wounded.
As Pope Francis calls for peace in Nicaragua, we look at the mass protests against Daniel Ortega and his government's bloody crackdown. More than 100 people have been killed since April. Then to Mexico, where a federal court has effectively thrown out the government's investigation into the disappearance of 43 college students from Ayotzinapa Teacher School in 2014 and ordered a new investigation. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has announced an unconditional ceasefire with the Taliban to last until June 20th. The ceasefire comes after Muslim clerics in Afghanistan issued a fatwa, or religious ruling, against suicide bombings, after an attack Monday claimed by ISIS killed 14 people who'd gathered for a clerics' peace summit in Kabul. This was President Ghani's first unconditional offer of a ceasefire since his election in 2014. The White House says President Donald Trump may hold a second day of talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un when the pair meet for an unprecedented summit at a 5-star hotel in Singapore next week. Trump will meet in Washington today with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to discuss North Korea before both head to Canada for a G7 summit Friday. The G7 preparations come as Trump reportedly held a testy phone call Wednesday with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, telling him, "Didn't you guys burn down the White House?" It was an apparent reference to the War of 1812, when British forces, not Canadians, torched the White House. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Dennis Rodman said Wednesday the former NBA basketball star may attend next week's Trump-Kim summit in Singapore. Rodman twice appeared on Trump's NBC reality TV show Celebrity Apprentice and has repeatedly traveled to North Korea, where he spent time with Kim Jong-un, who he's called his friend for life. In San Diego, California, a federal judge has ruled an ACLU lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's policy of separating children from their undocumented immigrant parents may proceed. U.S. District Judge Dana Sabra on Wednesday dismissed a Trump administration challenge to the suit, saying if the conduct alleged in the suit is brutal and offensive. The ruling came as Attorney General Jeff Sessions defended the Trump administration's policy amidst growing outrage over reports of Border Patrol and ICE agents ripping toddlers and even babies from the arms of their mothers. This is Attorney General Sessions being questioned by the conservative talk radio host Hugh Hewitt on Tuesday.
I understand the prosecution part, but is it necessary to separate the children? Could they not be detained in facilities where at least mothers and infants could remain together?
Well, most are not infants. Most are teenagers, although we do have a number of younger ones now, more than we've seen recently, and they are maintained in a very safe environment, not by the law enforcement team at Department of Health, Homeland Security, but put with Health and Human Services.
According to the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project, infants as young as 53 weeks old have been brought to court hearings alone after they were forcibly separated from their parents by U.S. authorities. Meanwhile, in Mexico City, parents who've been separated from their children in the United States gathered Wednesday for a forum aimed at family reunifications. This is Ana Laura Lopez, who's unable to be with her children in the U.S.
Deportations and deportees are more than just statistics and topics for current affairs. We are human beings who went to the U.S. to work. We fought to have a better life, and we are currently separated from our families. What we want the most is for us to be with our children, for there to be a bit more sensitivity and humanity from authorities, as well as the broader society.
White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney fired the entire advisory board of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Wednesday in the latest move by the Trump administration to render the agency toothless. This comes after Mulvaney, who serves as acting director of the Consumer Watchdog, requested $0 in funding for the CFPB earlier this year. As a Republican congressmember from South Carolina, Mulvaney repeatedly voted in favor of bills that would have eliminated the Bureau. A federal judge has ruled Environmental Protection Agency head Scott Pruitt must produce evidence to back his claims that humans are not the primary cause of climate change. The lawsuit stems from a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a watchdog group which sought to have the EPA cite any studies that might be used to corroborate Pruitt's claims, which defy nearly all available climate science. The FOIA request came after Pruitt made this remark on CNBC in March of last year, not long after his confirmation as EPA administrator.
No, I think that measuring with precision human activity on the climate is something very challenging to do, and there's tremendous disagreement about the degree of impact. So no, I would not agree that it's a primary contributor to the global warming that we see.
Meanwhile, two top EPA officials have resigned over a mounting series of scandals involving Scott Pruitt, who faces more than a dozen ethics investigations. EPA scheduler Milan Hupp will step down amidst reports she helped Pruitt go apartment hunting and helped him shop for a used mattress from the Trump International Hotel. Also resigning is Pruitt's senior counsel, Sarah Greenwald, who traveled internationally and across the United States with Pruitt as he met with industry officials and foreign diplomats. On Wednesday, Elena Plott, a journalist with The Atlantic, reported she was castigated by EPA spokesman Jahan Wilcox when she asked for comment on the resignations. Wilcox reportedly told Plott, quote, "You're a piece of trash." Meanwhile, President Trump praised the EPA's embattled leader Wednesday during a cabinet meeting at FEMA's headquarters in Washington.
Administrator Scott Pruitt, thank you, Scott, very much. EPA is doing really, really well. And, you know, somebody has to say that about you a little bit. You know that, Scott.
President Trump made that remark after he toured FEMA headquarters alongside his wife, Melania. It was the first public appearance by the pair in nearly a month after the First Lady vanished from public view following what they said was kidney surgery, prompting speculation about her well-being and whereabouts. During Trump's tour of FEMA, the president did not mention a new study that found Hurricane Maria killed more than 4,600 people in Puerto Rico, 70 times the official toll. Trump did make the claim that the U.S. Coast Guard saved 16,000 people who sailed into the Gulf of Mexico to watch Hurricane Harvey as it struck Texas last year. The Coast Guard says there's no evidence to back Trump's claim, and so does the Texas governor. Ukraine's prime minister is insisting radiation levels in the capital Kyiv and around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant remain safe after a wildfire tore through a forest that remains heavily contaminated by the reactor meltdown in 1986. Scientists say smoke from the fires has the potential to contaminate crops up to 100 miles away with enough radioactive isotopes to make food unsafe to eat. In Guatemala, the death toll from the volcanic eruption near Guatemala City has risen to 99 as hope fades for the nearly 200 people who remain missing. Guatemala's government says some 4,000 people are living in shelters after lava and ash destroyed homes and engulfed whole villages. This is survivor Amilcar Ajacabon.
This is just going to be a cemetery because San Miguel de los Lotes is gone. So those souls, those victims, they're right there. They're buried.
Spain's newly appointed socialist prime minister, Pedro Sanchez, has unveiled his new cabinet, with women making up 11 of his 17 cabinet posts. The move makes Spain the country with the highest proportion of women heading government ministries. It contrasts with the male-dominated cabinet of recently ousted Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy, whose cabinets had at most 36% women. President Trump has commuted the life sentence of a woman who is imprisoned for a first-time nonviolent drug offense after her cause was taken up by reality television star Kim Kardashian West. Alice Marie Johnson, a 63-year-old great-grandmother from Memphis, was released Wednesday from federal prison in Aliceville, Alabama, where she had been serving her sentence for nearly 22 years.
This is a miracle day. This has been the greatest day of my life. The most unexpected thing to happen to me in my life. I'm just so thankful. I feel like my life is starting over again.
We'll have more on Trump's commutation of Alice Marie Johnson's life sentence after headlines. We'll be speaking with the ACLU. In Mesa, Arizona, 4 police officers have been placed on paid administrative leave after surveillance video showed them repeatedly punching an unarmed man and slamming his head into the wall. The video, which was recorded without sound, appears to show 33-year-old Robert Johnson posed no threat to officers as he leaned against a wall of a hallway in an apartment complex when the officers surrounded him and began pummeling him with their fists while knocking him to the ground. This isn't the first time Mesa police have faced charges of excessive force. Last December, a jury found former Mesa police officer Philip Brailsford not guilty of murdering 26-year-old Daniel Shaver, an unarmed man gunned down in a hotel hallway in 2016 as he repeatedly begged for his life. Body cam video of that incident shows the officer ordering Shaver to crawl on his hands and knees before the officer opened fire repeatedly, killing the man. A new Washington Post study finds more than half of all murders in U.S. cities go unsolved, with a homicide arrest rate of just 49%. The finding is based on data from more than 50,000 homicides in 50 of the largest cities in the U.S. over the past decade. The Washington Post also found police investigations of murders involving white victims were significantly more likely to result in arrests than those involving Black or Latino victims. Members of the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles are speaking out after they were disinvited by President Trump from a planned team celebration at White House earlier this week. On Wednesday, Eagles safety Malcolm Jenkins actually didn't speak out. He was silent, holding a series of signs, handwritten, before reporters in a team locker room in response to their questions about the cancellation. Among the signs Jenkins displayed, more than 60% of people in prison are people of color. Colin Kaepernick gave $1 million to charity. And in 2018, 439 people shot and killed by police thus far. A new study by the environmental group Greenpeace found plastic waste and toxic chemicals in remote parts of Antarctica, adding to evidence that pollution from human activity is impacting every corner of the planet. Greenpeace activist and biologist Grant Oakes said a major culprit is single-use plastic.
Single-use plastic is, they believe now is accounting for up to 70–80% of the plastic that's entering the oceans. And it's for a few moments of convenience, it has, sometimes up to hundreds of years of lifetime in the ocean.
This month, the European Commission unveiled draft rules that would ban an array of single-use plastic items, including plastic plates, cutlery, and straws. And Ira Berlin, the extraordinary historian who chronicled the history of U.S. slavery, has died at the age of 77. Berlin studied millions of documents in his lifetime to tell the stories of African Americans fighting for emancipation. His books include Generations of Captivity, Slaves Without Masters, and Many Thousands Gone, the first 2 centuries of slavery in North America. He once said of his work, "One does not get over history. One just has to come to terms with it." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.
Nosso programa fica por aqui. Você pode acompanhar a gente pela nossa página no Facebook ou pelo blog Terra em Transe.
Nos vemos na próxima semana. Até lá!